Hi everyone. So today I'll be giving you a brief presentation on the Chocolate Picture Rapid Assessment Toolkit, which is the global tool developed by the Chocolate Picture Working Group with the involvement of several organizations, NGOs and UN agencies. The process started in 2010, mid-2010, and so far it has been tested in several contexts, and it's just about to be finalized. So just to give you a little bit of a sense of what we will be covering today, hopefully the objectives that we have from today's session is for you to be able to identify situations where CPRA should be conducted, understand the what we need to know cycle, which is a basis for our process, the CPRA process, and also know a little bit about the overall structure of the toolkit, and last but not least, be familiar with the methodology used during the CPRA. We encourage coordination mechanisms in different countries to conduct data collection within the CPRA only if the information that we require is not available in other forms. So the data collection having many potential ethical consequences is something that we do not take lightly, and we try to encourage everyone to start from the process of desk review, which I'll explain a little more later, to be able to tell if the information that is needed for programming is actually accessible through other means other than data collection. The challenges that you will always have, so if you decide to go ahead and do the data collection, you will always have challenges. We know it's expensive, we know it's time consuming, so it's sometimes difficult to convince donors or either the head of the organization or whoever is responsible to make a decision to go ahead or not. So for that, we're basically giving you some justifications that you can use in convincing either your donor or your boss or whoever needs to make the decision. We believe using the CPRA tool will give us reliable information, but more importantly, time and location specific information. Meaning you may have been working in a country for many years and have been doing programming, a certain type of programming in response to a certain type of emergency, for example, flooding in Asia, which is very common. But you don't specifically know how this specific community at this time is reacting to the flood that came this year. So what CPRA will give you is time and location specific information on that emergency. And it also helps us create a baseline for future use, in the sense that we oftentimes, within child protection especially, within protection sector generally, but specifically in child protection, we suffer from not being very evidence-based. Therefore, there are very few occasions where we have a good baseline to which we can compare the current situation. So if you do a good and systematic child protection rapid assessment today, in a year, if you have to go back and look at the situation again and do a situation analysis, we'll have a baseline to look back at and say the situation has changed from point A to point B. Whereas at this point, most contexts don't have this luxury. And generally, it also, doing rapid assessments, or generally assessments, will add credibility to our sector. First, by encouraging interagency collaboration from very early stages of the emergency, which is the byproduct of doing the rapid assessment, and we have seen in many contexts how doing the rapid assessment makes the coordination mechanism much more coherent and unified. And it also generally improves the evidence base in our sector, which is rather weak at this point. So the reason Child Protection Working Group decided to develop this Child Protection Rapid Assessment Toolkit was first and foremost the need for evidence base for programming and response. We tend to fall back on our background knowledge and prejudgments on the situations for programming. We do a lot of programming, but we don't necessarily base it on existing evidence. We also felt a strong need, or have been told by the field, how there's an urgent need of a standardized tool for the sector that would be easy to use in relatively short period of time. And this didn't exist in a common form. There have been many organizations who have their own tools that they use, and they're trained on it, but there's basically no possibility of comparing the information from one agency to the other agency's methodology and tool. So as I was explaining, the evidence base cannot be improved that much when you have such diverse sets of methodologies and tools. So the Child Protection Rapid Assessment has its limitations, of course, just by the fact of being rapid, or being used in a context where we need rapid information. It will have some limitations, and there are a lot of them are. We are conscious of it, but we feel like it's acceptable to accept those limitations to achieve a quick overview of the situation. So because of that, we will say that it provides us with a snapshot of urgent child protection needs. It gives us, quote unquote, good enough information for programming and advocacy purposes. So it's nothing beyond good enough. It's not perfect. You will, when you get more familiar with the toolkit, you will see that there are a lot of things there are a lot of questions that could go into more details and dig deeper. But we intentionally don't want to do that, because it will take much more time, it will take much more expertise on the side of the assessors to be able to get more in-depth information. So we suffice to having good enough information for our programming. And then hopefully it will be a stepping stone for more comprehensive need assessment, in the sense that if out of the Child Protection Rapid Assessment we find out that separation is a major issue in this emergency, what we can do is go ahead after a couple of months and do a very specific and more in-depth assessment in the area of separation, and not necessarily cover everything, which is the case in the Child Protection Rapid Assessment. And you should be aware of the limitations, because CPRA is not a comprehensive assessment or surveillance mechanism. It can be developed to be a monitoring system, a situation monitoring, not a program monitoring, which are conceptually different things. But it's not set up to be a comprehensive assessment. It's not a tool to produce information that can be generalized to the population. So we should not, based on the chalk picture rapid assessment results, we should not be talking about this percentage of children are separated, or that percent of children are in danger of death or injury. So we cannot generalize to the population. And it's not meant for long-term programming, in the sense that if you want to do your 2-year program or 5-year programming, you would be better off having a different methodology and doing a more in-depth analysis of the situation and not use the chalk picture rapid assessment. You can use it as a base and further develop it, but as it's set up, it won't be appropriate for that. So just to wrap up what we can expect to get out of CPRA, it will give us the scale of the needs, it will give us priorities in terms of geography and programmatic areas, and hopefully it will help us a little bit in how to configure our response. But we try really hard within the tool to look into existing capacities within communities. And we are hoping that our programming, based on the information we get, our programming is going to be towards reinforcement of those capacities rather than creating parallel, unless it's as a last resort we have to. As many other procedures in the humanitarian world, we also try to have a set of guiding principles. Some of them are common with the humanitarian principles and principles that UNICEF uses, but some of them are slightly different. As you'll see, do no harm and best interests of the child are at the top of the list, which are always our leading, when we're dealing with children, our leading principles. We also take confidentiality of information very seriously. We do try to recognize children's and communities' capacities in adapting to or responding to the emergency context when we collect our information. We try to always consider information that already exists so that we don't duplicate, we don't create assessment fatigue. And another guiding principle is called non-hindrance of urgent action, in the sense that at the programmatic level, there are lots of issues that we may need to act upon today, and we can't wait until the results of assessment is out. So in that case, just to give you an example, if there is a massive earthquake or a conflict, and as a result, there's a massive movement of population happening, either across the border or not. We know that based on experience, separations happen nearly during all massive displacement. Therefore, we cannot say we are going to do an assessment in 2 weeks, so we're not going to do anything about potential separation. So urgent action here is basically responding to this and making sure that we register, we disseminate information to avoid separation, and not wait for the assessment result. We also encourage all the organizations who will be involved in the CPRA to have at least the intention of doing something upon the availability of results, in the sense that the commitment of responding to the needs when we know them is very important for us. It doesn't mean that if for example, UNICEF or IRC or Save the Children participates and they don't manage to get funding, or the type of needs that we find out are not in line with the type of programming they're doing in that region, in that specific country, we'll go back to them and say, oh, you didn't have an intention. No, of course, those limitations we understand, but generally, the reason we do the assessments should be to respond. Moving on to a little more information about the actual process of the CPRA. We have a cycle that starts with what we call what we need to know, the W, W, and K. A lot of you are familiar with the concept of developing indicators before you do an assessment. For more qualitative assessments, which our field, child protection, is one of those that requires more qualitative approach to assessment, we prefer to focus on, instead of indicators, prefer to focus on what we call what we need to know, which is a set of issues that we identify before we start planning and programming or planning and implementing a child protection assessment. So we find out what are the specific things in the area of child protection that we need information on in that particular emergency. In some emergencies, the issue of child recruitment into armed forces and groups is an issue. In some, it's not. In some emergencies, issue of gender-based and sexual violence are major issues. In others, it may not be. So the first step in every move that we do in a CPRA process is to sit together with the child protection working group members or the sub-cluster members and the government. Hopefully the government is already a member, and come up with a list of what we need to know. There is a suggested list within the guide, the CPRA guide, which is provided to you within the Community of Practice and on the Child Protection Working Group website, which is cpwg.net. So you can see that there are 22 issues in certain areas that we have identified as what we need to know. But they always need to be adapted to the context. After we adapt or develop our what we need to know, we move on to develop data elements, what we call data elements. That will basically turn into our questions. Just to give you an example, if our what we need to know is patterns of separation. So the issue that we're looking at is patterns of separation in this emergency. We may need several data elements to inform that one what we need to know, which is, in this example, patterns of separation. We need to know whether or not separations have been happening in this emergency. We need to know whether girls are affected or boys are affected more, or there's no difference. We also may need to know what is the age of the most affected children. Is it the younger children or older children that are being affected? We also may want to know, is it voluntary separation or is it involuntary separation? Or is it more like disappearances that are happening? And all of these data elements, these are just examples that I'm giving you, all of these data elements that can translate directly into questions that will go into the questionnaire, they will all together inform that one, what we need to know, which was specific questions we want to ask to fulfill or respond to that, to our what we need to know. Then we adapt the tools, adapt the sample tools that are provided to you within the Child Protection Assessment toolkit. After adapting it, we hopefully train our teams and send them to the field to collect the data, and there's a certain level of compilation that happens at the field level, and then there is data management that happens at the central level through an already programmed data management tool that I will explain later. Upon compilation and data entry, We will analyze and interpret the information, and that will in turn inform our what we need to know. So the reason this is in the form of a cycle is because at the end of the cycle, we will go back to what we need to know, and hopefully we will have answers and enough information about each and every what we need to know that we determined at the beginning of the process. So just to summarize, what we need to know are a series of unknowns or little knowns that we wish to learn about. At the beginning of any process, CPRA process, we encourage anyone who is using this toolkit to first sit down with those who have knowledge of the context and hopefully do a guest review beforehand to gain more knowledge about the context and adapt to what we need to know. That would always be the first step. We also encourage everyone, this is just a quick reminder, to read the guide. The guide is rather short, it's 20-something pages, and hopefully if we manage to get a copy of it will become even smaller than what it is now. And it has a lot of very useful information for those who want to plan and implement CPRA. When to do the CPRA? When is the best time? The first thing that we always remind each other of is let's first try to integrate CP, child protection, in other multi-sectoral assessments if possible, especially the one that OCHA conducts at the beginning, during the first 2 weeks of an emergency. Getting ourselves on the table when the discussions are going on about multi-sectoral assessments is very, very important. There are sometimes challenges in terms of getting that spot at the table of discussions, just because of the character of our subcluster, being a subcluster and not a cluster. But experience shows for us that if we try hard enough, we'll always get a seat at that table, and try to get as much as possible into multi-sectorial assessments before we move to our own CPRA. And it's only if we cannot get enough information out of multi-sectorial assessment that we move to the CPRA. Of course, as any kind of intervention or response, the timing is very dependent on the nature of the emergency. One thing that we always say we won't do is we would never, in a rapid onset emergency, we would never start immediately after the emergency. And the reason for it is related to the nature of our sector, which is child protection. And child protection being more of a qualitative field of work, it does not allow for quick and dirty approach to data collection. You will need to allow for the population to start feeling what is happening to them due to that specific emergency, if it's an earthquake or flood, and absorb it before you can go and pose questions to them. For example, if a population has been hit by an earthquake, you cannot really go and ask the population about psychosocial effects of the earthquake on children, and if no time has passed from the earthquake, because the signs won't start coming out until a while after. Or if the population has moved because of the flood, and they have moved to a new area, be it a camp or just a new part of the country, when you ask them about potential hazards in the environment, for potential recruitment of children, if they haven't been there for that long, if they have been there only for a day or two, they will not be able to tell you. They don't know what the hazards are in their environment. So there, and also the fact that we rely on perceptions of the population when we pose our questions makes this even more important. So we allow for the population to form their perceptions first about what has happened to them before we go out. And another aspect of this is the fact that a lot of the time experience shows when you go in the immediate aftermath of emergencies to collect data, most of the key informants and those we talk to will want to focus on very urgent needs that are related to shelter and food and wash, for example. So it becomes rather difficult for assessors to actually get at more qualitative issues like psychosocial issues of children, or for example, sexual violence in the new environment. So all of this suggests to us that we should not be starting immediately after a rapid onset emergency. So we always encourage you to start programming immediately. Start planning immediately, but wait at least 2 weeks before you start the data collection. And in a context where you have a chronic emergency or a long time has passed since the emergency has happened, then there's no one good time. You basically have to decide when is the best time logistically and security-wise for you and for the community. So it's only in a rapid onset emergency that we have that very specific guideline of don't start unless at least 2 weeks has passed. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the actual toolkit that we have developed and a little bit of an overview of the methodology that is used in CPRA. The toolkit has 3 main components. One is the short guide that is about 22-23 pages. It outlines a lot of issues that you need to know if you're planning the CPRA. So from coordination and planning to sampling, which I will explain a little bit about because it's an important part of our methodology. Data collection teams, how to recruit them and how to train them. It will tell us a little bit about analysis and interpretation, and also some guidance on report writing. Then we have the part that is most important for the assessors. So if you're training the assessors, this is the part that you will be focusing on, which is sample tools. We call it the sample tools because we don't want to give a sense that these are the tools that needs to be used in the field. They're the type of tools that have gone through several iterations and revisions, but at the same time, unless you adapt them to your context, they should not be used. We make them as good as possible, but that doesn't mean that it's directly applicable to every single context, which is impossible. You can never have one tool that is applicable to every single context anymore. So there's a small guide within the sample tools document that tells you about desk review, how to conduct a desk review, and a little checklist that will help you when you're conducting your desk review. Then we have a direct observation tool that will help you conduct your direct observation when you're in the field. It's a series of questions that is more of a guide of what kind of things you want to look for when you're conducting direct observation. And I'll go into further details about each of these in a moment. Then we have the key informant interview form, which again is kind of the core methodology that we use. Key informant interviews are at the heart of our methodology. Site reports is basically the compilation of every information or every and all information collected in each and every site. At the end of each day, when data collection teams finish their work in each site, they will get together with their teammates who also work in that site. So normally there will be 3 of them, unless it's a large site. They will all get together. They will go through every single question that they asked to the key informant and all the observations that they did, and they will come up with one answer per question for the site. So each site will produce only one report, which will have the responses based on the collective response given in that site to every single question that we have. There is, of course, that might not come across as very clear, and it's normal. It's a slightly complicated thing to just fit into a short briefing. So hopefully you will have a chance to go through a training before you actually have to plan and implement CPRA, and you'll get to know more about this. But if not, there is information in the guide about the site report, and there is information about the site report within the sample tool. So right before the site report part of the sample tool starts, which I believe is Annex 4 of the sample tool document, you will have a little bit of a guideline of how site report works and what it is for. And the last part of the sample tools is an urgent action form, which is used in cases when assessors during their data collection, come across a case that needs immediate response. And that's always an exception. We do not go out and look for urgent action cases. We only deal with them if they're brought to our attention during our data collection, or we just come across one by chance. So it's not an active seeking of individual cases. We should be very clear about that. It's only if we're referred to, for example, by one of the key informants who's giving us information, then we have a responsibility to act. And it's only, I repeat, in cases where the child needs immediate response, otherwise life or well-being of that child will be in immediate danger. So it's not a response. We're not responding to the needs of the children. We're only responding to the very specific cases. And finally, the data management tool, which is an Excel-based tool, very easy to use, of course, relative to other tools that are out there. There are 3 main pages in it. First page is the data entry page, which is the only page that you actually need to use, because once you enter your data, your frequency analysis gets generated automatically. So there are tables on the second page or second sheet of the Excel file, and then on the third sheet of the Excel file, you will automatically get your graphs. I should emphasize that these are very basic analysis. For more complicated cross-analysis and if you want to hold a variable constant and look at differences, you will have to have someone who is good with statistics and good with Excel to be able to manipulate the data further. So this is just for basic analysis. So just to quickly go through a little bit more depth on each of the 3 methodologies basically that we use, one being guest review. As I said, it's an absolutely necessary component of our methodology. It happens more or less at the same time as you are doing adapting your what you need to know, because guest review can inform very much how you would adapt your what you need to know and how you would revise them, and vice versa. what we need to know are going to help you know what are the type of information you're looking for. And the desk review will also help you in adapting the tools, for example, in terms of language, what are the terms that should or should not be used. If you're lucky enough to find information about that, it will help you a lot. What are the issues that are sensitive? So you may need to create proxy questions for them rather than asking them directly. And then at the end of the process, in triangulation and interpretation of data, that will help you a lot. And triangulation, as you may know, is basically a process of validating your data. We say you need at least 3 different either sources or methods of data collection to be able to validate one piece of information. Normally, if you receive the information from 2 different sources and they both confirm the other one, the third one is not that necessary, but you see which one is closer to, which one of the first 2 are closer to the reality. Then the other very important part of our methodology is direct observation, which is something that we always do, but we don't recognize it as a method. It's a very, very powerful methodology that you can use if you're aware of it, both structured and unstructured observation. Structured observation is more like you knowing exactly what you want to observe. For example, you want to see if there are locks on latrine doors, which is, in some context, a proxy for potential for sexual violence. Or you want to know exactly if there are factories in or around where the population lives, and whether or not there are children working in that factory, which is the question that would lead you to know whether or not there's potential for child labor in that environment. So that's structured, but then you also have unstructured observation in the sense that an unstructured observation starts from the moment you start approaching that site or the area where you're doing your assessment. And that's, you're generally looking for potential threats to children's well-being. You're looking at generally at the hazards that exist. So anything that can give you an indication of potential risk to children. So that's more of an unstructured observation. So your issue is clear. Your issue, for example, is, are there risks to safety of children? But you don't specifically ask, are there rivers or roads around which would be structured around the camp? And then for us, we combine the 2 methods in CPRA. And then the key from an interview, of course, is the base method that we are using in CPRA. And therefore, selecting the key informant becomes really important. And we try to spend a lot of time training our assessors in selecting the key informant, because we don't always have the luxury of having, for example, a local partner working in that specific site where we want to conduct the assessment to help us select the key informant. Therefore, the principal group that will be involved in selecting key informant are the assessors or the assessment team that goes to each site. So it's important to train them really well on how to select key informant. There are specific guidelines in the guide on how to select them. But generally, to give you a sense, we should have a reason to believe that they have significant knowledge of the situation of the population of interest. They should be able to understand the question, of course, and their personal experience should be representative of the community. For example, if you find a journalist who has been in that site for 3 days, but has never been there before, it's just because the earthquake happened and the journalist ended up there, he or she might have a lot of information to give you, but or his experience is not representative of the community. So you would want to use that person as a source of information, but not as a key informant, in the sense that you wouldn't conduct a key informant interview with them, but you will ask them general questions, you will ask them who is the best person to talk to. You may use them as potential source for triangulation and validation of data, but they're not your key informant. And we also have to look out for dominant agenda that often is a problem in certain conflicts. And then urgent action, I explained a little bit. With lack of time, I'm not going to go into further details, but it's basically very important that before you send your assessment teams into the field, you create a procedure, a standard operating procedure, to make sure that your assessors are aware of steps that they need to take if they come across an urgent action case. And site report, finally, for our methodology, to kind of wrap it up, it's very important to use the site report. It's an integral part of our methodology, and as I explained, it brings all the information that was collected in one site into one form that will then be analyzed. So we're not analyzing key from an interview questionnaires. So we're not analyzing individual key informant responses, but we're analyzing the reports that come out of each site. And there are very specific reasons for that. I'm happy to go in more details one-on-one, just because of the lack of time here. And finally, after we do our analysis, it's absolutely necessary to go through an interpretation process. And the difference between analysis and interpretation is, of course, clear analysis, more mechanical. You put together the data that you collected and compile them and make sense of individual data points in the form of a collective set of data. And anyone can do the data analysis as long as they know a little bit of Excel and a little bit of statistics. But then interpretation is something that is absolutely dependent on those who know the context very, very well. So it's basically making sense of the analyzed data, looking at the graphs, looking at the tables that you have produced, frequency analysis, or cross-analysis, or cross-tabulated tables that you have produced, and finding out what this means in programmatic terms. And unless you do the interpretation, you will not be able to do a good programming or a meaningful programming. I'll quickly go into some technical considerations that we have during the CPRA. It's very important to note that we are trying to distance ourselves from the ad hoc assessments that we tend to do. Not systematic. We just put together a form overnight when an emergency happens. The day after, we get into a car and go to the fields, and the first person we get to in the first site, we talk to them. If there's a child, we talk to a child, ask some questions. There's a woman, there's a man, there's a community leader. We don't really think about how to select the site, how to select that key informant. We just do it on an ad hoc basis, and that's a way of doing it. We believe that it's only appropriate in the first couple of days after an emergency to get a very, very general and rough sense of the situation. But what we are trying to do is a systematic approach to assessment, meaning it's very important to pay attention on how we select our sites, people that we talk to in the site, and methodologies that we use in the site. So what we try to teach in the process of whenever I do training in the process is how to do your sampling. And before you do your sampling, you have to define your unit of measurement. And unit of measurement is basically the unit that you use to measure anything. So the population of affected people, you either use individual as your unit of measurement, or you use households as your unit of measurement, or communities. Just because if you use individuals, the number of questionnaires that you need to fill out goes exponentially high. Also, households, you will have to cover a lot of households to be able to get accurate information for your programming. We have decided to keep our unit of measurement at the community level. And that means that every single question that you will see in the questionnaire is targeted to the community, meaning we ask about children of the community. We don't ask about the child of the key informant. So it's not enough for someone to live in a community and be a mother or father for us to select them as a key informant, because they will know about their own child and maybe their brother or sister's child and their neighbor's child, but that's it. Whereas it's important to select the teacher or a health worker or a community leader who deals with children of the community, who is more likely to know about the totality of the situation of children. How are they doing? Have they changed behavior? What kind of risks they're exposed to now after the emergency, and blah, blah, blah. So our unit of measurement is community. We don't go smaller because we'll have to increase our data collection capacity by a lot if we do that. And this is, again, reminding ourselves the rapid assessment in an emergency context. So we don't have the time to interview 5,000 people. Sampling, as we all know, the best, academically speaking, the best and most accurate sampling method is random sampling, but it has its own limitations. Random sampling requires a very large sample size to be representative. Therefore, what we do is, what we prefer to use within the CPRA is what we call purposive sampling, or it's called purposive sampling in the academic world. And what it means is we basically first identify different scenarios within the affected population. And the scenarios are defined based on how much we think different parts of this population are affected and how their needs might be different. So just to give you an example, there's an earthquake that hit a mountainous area. So there are people who live in villages on the higher altitudes of that mountain. They're affected. There are people who are living in the lower altitudes of the same mountain. They're also affected. But the ones on the higher altitude are suffering from snow at the same time, and the ones in the lower altitude are suffering from flood at the same time. Do we think that their needs are going to be exactly the same? Probably not. So we already have a very natural separation into two scenarios. So within our assessment, we're going to use the same tool, but we have two scenarios. One is those in the lower areas of the mountain, lower altitudes, who are also affected by flood, and those who are in the higher altitudes and also affected by snow. And then you might have part of this population that has moved to a camp in the low-lying areas close to the sea, whose needs may be completely different now because they don't suffer from the flood nor from the snow, and the humanitarian community is responding to their needs much more systematically in the official camp, or the government is responding to their needs. So their needs are going to be completely different. So we have three very natural scenarios. And then within each of these scenarios, we pick a certain number of them, of the communities, or what we call the sites, to produce a site report, a single site report that will be analyzed. So within each scenario, our suggestion is to not select less than 15, so always more than 15 or higher sites within each scenario. So if you have 3 scenarios, we recommend at least 45 sites, which is 15 in each of the 3. You can go higher, you can go up to 30. We don't necessarily recommend more than 30, just because this is, again, a qualitative assessment, and experience and evidence within qualitative research world shows that after a certain number of after a certain sample size, you will start getting to saturation, which those who are familiar with this term know that you basically keep getting the same answers. And the new information that you get is so small that it doesn't justify having the largest sample size. Sorry, I went a little technical there. But just to wrap up, I want to remind everyone that within this, I did not, as you have noticed, I did not mention focus group discussions. We do not, although focus group discussions are a very, very powerful qualitative method, we do not use it in this context because we believe that focus group discussions require further training than we normally would have time for assessors or for facilitators to be able to effectively facilitate a focus group discussion. We believe that focus group discussions require way more time to analyze than, for example, key-point interviews or direct observations, which we most of the time in an emergency context we won't have the time and we won't have the expertise to do. So it will be a waste of time and resources to do them, but not be able to analyze them. But if you do have the capacity for triangulation reasons, go for it. Develop your own tool. Do not use the key informant interview tool for focus group discussions, or you can develop your own tool for focus group discussion and run it. Another issue that I should point out is we do not interview children, although we do value highly participation of children overall within response. In an emergency context, in a rapid assessment setting, because we cannot ensure that the principle of do no harm is upheld, if we do not have highly trained assessors, we do not interview children. Because if your assessors are not highly trained on dealing with children, on interacting with children, on interviewing children, they can easily put children in further harm, which is the last thing we would want in an assessment process. So because we are not sure if we can ensure availability of those kind of assessors, we suggest that we do not interview children. But if you have the capacity and if you want to do it, please develop the specific tools for children. The caring tools are not designed for children. If you have the capacity, again, you can develop your tools, and it's definitely going to add to the quality of your assessment. Just to quickly wrap up the sampling, the steps that we follow is we first develop our sample frame, which is basically the list of all affected sites. Then we determine sampling scenarios. We find out what are the scenarios within the affected population. We might have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different scenarios, and then we define the units of measurement or sites in each of them, which is the community. But in a rural setting, you may pick villages as your site. In an urban community, you may pick neighborhoods as your site. So the units of measurement within the same assessment, the definition of it might be different in different scenarios. And then you determine the list of the sites that you will be visiting. just some of the lessons learned. We encourage you to follow all the steps. There have been lots of cases where people did not follow the steps, so the quality dropped. And please try not to pick and choose from the tools, but use the methodology as a whole. And last but not least, some cautionary notes. If you're not familiar with the methodology, or if you don't have time to plan properly for the assessment, it's often better not to do an assessment, but to do a mediocre job. So if you have the time to properly prepare for the assessment, please do use this tool. It's available for everyone's use, and we are there to support you. Child Protection Working Group's website has a forum, so you can see it at cpwg.net. And my name is Hani Mansourian. I'm the focal point for assessment and measurement in Child Protection Working Group. Feel free to contact me for any further discussions or if you need support. Thank you very much.